Welcome to my channel, C.S. Lewis Spirit. In today's video, we enter into one of the most mysterious and intimate journeys of all time, a story hidden in the silence of the heart. Have you ever wondered if the soul can speak directly with God, not with words on the lips, but with whispers only the spirit can hear? Imagine a place where heaven and earth touch, not in visions of lightning or thunder, but in the stillness of one fragile human heart searching for answers. That is where our story begins. There is a quiet soul, restless yet yearning, carrying questions that no one else can answer. The world around seems loud, full of voices, opinions, and distractions. But inside, this soul feels an emptiness that nothing can fill. Prayer after prayer has been spoken, yet the silence of God lingers like a shadow. But what if, within that silence, there is a hidden conversation taking place, a dialogue too deep for words, too sacred for ordinary sound? This story invites us into that hidden space. The soul begins to wander, not in a physical place, but in a landscape of spirit, through memories, regrets, hopes, and secret desires. It carries wounds the world cannot see and longs for a voice that does not judge but understands. And just when despair feels heaviest, something happens. A faint stir, not outside but within. Could it be the presence of God answering without words? Or is it only the echo of longing itself? This hidden conversation is unlike any other. It is not filled with dramatic signs, nor is it easily explained. It is a dialogue of silence, where questions rise like fragile smoke and answers come as gentle impressions on the heart. The soul feels both seen and unseen, near and far, comforted yet challenged. And in this tension lies the mystery that keeps us listening, wondering, waiting for what comes next. But the more the soul leans into this invisible dialogue, the more it begins to realize something startling, that perhaps the silence of God is not absence at all, but presence in disguise. A presence that asks for trust, surrender, and a deeper kind of listening. The soul trembles at this thought, caught between fear and wonder. What if God has been speaking all along, but in a language the soul has never learned to hear? As the night grows darker and the world falls quiet, the soul feels itself standing at the edge of something vast, something eternal. A door seems to open, not with sound but with an unseen light, inviting the soul to step closer. Yet just as it prepares to enter, a question rises, sharp and urgent. What if stepping through changes everything forever? And here the story pauses. The conversation between God and the soul hangs in the air, waiting to unfold. What lies beyond that door? Is it comfort, truth, or a challenge greater than the soul has ever known? Stay with me, because what comes next might change the way you see silence, faith, and the hidden dialogue within your own heart. The soul stood at the edge of the unseen door, caught in the tension between longing and fear. Every part of its being wanted to step forward, to finally hear the voice of God clearly, but another part held back, afraid of what might be revealed. Was the silence of God a test of faith, or was it the sign of distance? This question became the heart of the conflict, and it pulled the soul into deeper unrest. The days seemed endless, filled with prayers that echoed without reply. Each unanswered whisper only sharpened the doubt. Was God listening at all? The soul felt torn between two worlds, the world of faith that demanded trust without proof, and the world of despair that asked, what if there is nothing on the other side of silence? This inner struggle became heavier with time, like carrying an invisible weight. And yet, somewhere in that weight, a strange kind of closeness also stirred, as if silence itself carried a hidden presence. While the soul wrestled with this mystery, memories began to surface. Times of joy when the presence of God felt near, and moments of loss when everything seemed abandoned. These memories became subplots within the greater struggle, reminding the soul that the conversation with God was not always empty, that perhaps there were answers woven into the journey itself. But even these glimpses only deepened the question. Why now, in this most desperate season, does heaven seem so far? The tension built like a storm. The soul could feel something shifting, as if God was near and yet refusing to reveal himself fully. Each night ended with the same haunting thought. Maybe the silence is not punishment, but preparation. Still, the door remained closed, and the soul could not yet see what waited beyond. The nights grew longer, and the silence pressed heavier than ever. The soul felt trapped in an endless waiting room, straining for a sound, a sign, anything that could prove God was near. Yet nothing came. Every unanswered prayer deepened the hunger, and with that hunger came fear. What if the silence stretched on forever? The conflict inside reached its breaking point. As the soul realized it was no longer just waiting for God's voice, it was battling to keep faith alive. Each day blurred into the next, but something strange began to happen. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt alive, almost as though it was breathing. The air around the soul seemed charged, like the stillness before a storm. Small things carried weight. A flicker of light through the window, the hush of wind through the trees, the quiet beat of its own heart. Could these be whispers of God? Or was the soul only imagining signs in the darkness, desperate to believe? The tension grew unbearable. Memories collided with doubts, and the soul felt torn in two. One part wanted to surrender completely, to step through the unseen door no matter the cost. The other part trembled, afraid that if it moved forward, it might find nothing at all, that the silence was only silence. The stakes had never felt higher. Faith or despair, trust or surrender, presence or absence. Everything hung on the edge of a single moment. And then, in the stillness of night, the door seemed to stir again, not with sound, but with a weight so heavy the soul could barely breathe. It knew something waited on the other side, something that could change everything. The soul stood frozen, one step away from the truth, and the silence was louder than thunder. The soul stood frozen before the door, its weight pressing like a storm cloud ready to break. Just when it thought the silence had reached its peak, a new twist unsettled everything. For the first time, the silence seemed to answer back, not with words, but with a mirror held deep inside the soul itself. Instead of hearing God's voice, it began to hear its own, echoing louder than ever, exposing doubts, wounds, and unspoken fears. It was as if the hidden conversation had turned inward, forcing the soul to face truths it had long avoided. This unexpected turn shook the soul to its core. It realized that the conflict was not only between God and silence, but between its own longing for certainty and its fear of surrender. What if the voice of God could only be found by first listening to the fragments of the heart? What if the silence was not empty at all, but filled with echoes of forgotten prayers, unanswered cries, and pieces of faith still waiting to awaken? The soul felt trapped between revelation and collapse, as though every step forward meant letting go of what it thought it knew. The stakes grew sharper. The soul began to feel tested in ways it never imagined. Strange questions stirred in the quiet. Was God speaking through this mirror of self? Or was the silence stretching into deception, drawing the soul into confusion? Each possibility felt dangerous, and the risk of being wrong weighed heavily. The stillness that once seemed peaceful now felt charged with unseen power, as if eternity itself leaned close, waiting for the soul's response. In the darkness, another layer unfolded. The soul sensed that this was not just about its own journey. It was part of something larger, a dialogue that echoed across all who had ever wrestled with faith, doubt, and the silence of God. The realization deepened the conflict, pulling the soul further into suspense. If this was more than personal, then its choice carried more weight than it ever dreamed. The unseen door pulsed with mystery, and the silence grew unbearable. Something was about to break, but the soul still did not know if it would be light or shadow waiting on the other side. The silence pressed so heavily that the soul felt it might break. Every fear, every question, every hidden wound seemed to hang in the air at once. Then, as if time itself paused, the unseen door opened, not with sound, but with a flood of presence. It was not thunder, not fire, not a voice shouting from the heavens. Instead, it was a stillness deeper than silence, a peace that filled every crack of doubt. The soul felt wrapped in something vast and unexplainable, as though God himself had entered the very space it thought was empty. The conflict that had raged for so long suddenly revealed its answer. The silence of God was not absence. It had been the purest form of presence all along, a presence too deep for words. Every unanswered prayer, every long night of waiting had been shaping the soul, preparing it to hear in a way it never had before. In that moment, the soul realized that God had been speaking the entire time, not in the language of sound, but in the language of trust, surrender, and hidden strength. Tears fell like rivers as the soul understood that the waiting had never been wasted. The fear of being abandoned melted into something new, the certainty of being seen, known, and loved beyond measure. It was the climax of the journey, the hidden conversation finally revealed. God's voice was not heard with the ears, but with the heart, and it carried more power than thunder. The silence had been the voice. And yet, just as the soul began to rest in this revelation, an unexpected twist unsettled it once more. The presence whispered, not in fear, but in challenge, that this was not the end. The hidden conversation was not just about comfort. It was a call. The soul was being asked to step back into the world, carrying this silent dialogue into places where others still wrestled with doubt. The revelation was real, but it came with a burden. Faith was no longer only personal, it was responsibility. The door had opened, the silence had spoken, but the journey was only beginning. The soul stood trembling, not with fear this time, but with awe, realizing that the true test was not surviving the silence. It was living with the voice it had finally found.